that it is appropriate for public question or comment. And at that time, the public will be unmuted and they'll have the opportunity to provide verbal questions or comments as appropriate. Members of the public who are unable to take advantage of the audio portion can transmit their questions to Ms. Tally by the comment or chat and answer features on the webcast platform, and also as a last resort by emailing to Ms. Tally at jtally, that's JTALLEY, at montclairnjusa.org. Again, that's jtally with 2 L's at montclairnjusa.org. First thing on our agenda this evening is our roll call, and I'm here.
Vice Chair Brodock.
I'm here.
Mr. Graham.
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally.
Here.
Ms. Lockman.
Here.
Mr. Pierre.
Present.
Councillor Schlager.
Here.
Ms. Willis. Carol, you're muted.
Here.
Okay. Good. And Mr. Jacobson.
I'm here.
Okay. And Mr. Neese.
I am here.
All right. That's it. We don't have a board engineer tonight because there's no engineering issues for this application.
Okay. We have the resolution from 103 Grove Street.
I think, can we have the minutes first?
Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We can do the minutes first. Good suggestion, Janice, thank you.
I received comments from Vice Chair Brodock with changes to the minutes. Are there any additional changes?
I think just for clarification, my edits contained revisions from Ms. Lockman as well.
Oh, okay. All right. So are there any additional changes to the minutes?
I move that they be accepted as edited by Ms. Lockman and our Vice Chair.
Let's second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
Yep. Okay.
Now to the Grove Street resolution.
So yes, so we received some changes to the Grove Street resolution. Arthur, do you want to discuss that? Because I believe you sent around the latest version this afternoon.
I did. I first of all thank you to the board members who provided changes, most notably Mr. Brodock, who deserves I think enormous thanks for reviewing this resolution so carefully and with such a careful eye. The version of the resolution that I circulated late this afternoon included the proposed changes that Mr. Brodock had made, and also because he pointed out that on page 6, the discussion of the retaining walls was not exactly clear. I attempted to get clarity from the applicant's attorney and its professionals, and I learned that Mr. Petrie was in the hospital. So I did not get responses back from engineering, from the applicant's engineer, until today, and there were several different versions of them that I had to go through. So for that reason, I circulated the final redlined version late in the afternoon today. Apart from Mr. Brodock's suggested changes that were sent to the board over the weekend, on page 6 in the whereas clause discussing the retaining walls, that is really the primary change that was made to the resolution. And as I indicated in my email to the board, I would adopt Ms. Lockman's suggestion that I change the name of the architect because it is one word, BDW or BWD Architects. That's the name of their company without a space between it. So depending on the board's pleasure, if the board approves the resolution, Janice, I will send you a revised, clean version tomorrow, and then it will include a change to the name of the architect. And lest I forget, Mr. Ian Wally also had some questions and concerns about the resolution that were also addressed as well. I didn't mean to leave you out, Tony.
Yeah, can I just, in what way were they addressed? Because, just for everyone's benefit, I had been questioning the, there was the lot has 0 frontage, and the applicant indicated that they would provide 20 feet of access. I looked long, far, and hard. I can only see 9.9 feet of actual rights. I asked that question at the last meeting of the applicant, and they said that, the other 10 plus feet had been submitted. And I combed through everything. I pointed out that the other area that would allow the access to Grove Street be 20 feet was noted on the last survey that says under lease. So is there a lease? Because if there's no lease or there's no other instrument, the reciprocal easement is really clear. The reciprocal easement that was presented last time only presents 9.9 feet. So my only question would be, just make it conditional. If they've testified that they've got 20 feet of access, make it conditional on proving that. So that's my only issue. Otherwise, we should say it only has 9.9 feet.
So yeah, Tony, your point was well taken, and I addressed, as soon as I got your email about it, I addressed it with the applicant's attorney. I did not get a response from the applicant's attorney with regard to that. I did get responses concerning the issue raised by the resolution, but I did not get a response to that. I would only say the following, though. It would be somewhat absurd, I think, for the applicant to come to this board and represent that it owned or had rights to that portion of the property for which it has. That's the only ingress and egress to the property. But if it concerns you, and I think it does, then what I would propose is to hold the resolution in abeyance, not until the next meeting of the board, but until I could get a satisfactory answer to the question that you raised, Tony. But I think they want to move ahead with the resolution.
But it goes to, when we evaluate the variance of 0 frontage said they had effective 20, and from what I can tell, they haven't proven the effective 20. They have effective 9.9. I'm no more concerned than just that, because the testimony, because 20 feet is a realistic two-way driveway, 9.9 feet is not, even though they use the railroad property. And their attorney said, yeah, it was submitted, which, and that's why maybe they just need to submit it or show it to us. That's all. And I think that if you just, I don't want to hold anything up. I just think some sort of condition that we take a look at that would be appropriate based on the way we voted.
And I agree 100%. But I tell you what, I won't send to Janice the resolution tomorrow until I've spoken with the attorney and get some proof that they do in fact have rights to that the additional 11 feet or so of that.
Thanks so much. I don't mean to hold it up anymore. I just want to make that comment. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay.
Well, Arthur, I also had a question though about the tractor trailers, whether we should add a condition that they're prohibited, or whether it's sufficient that it notes that tractor trailers will not be allowed on the property in that language where you reference tractor trailers. And I also wanted to know if it makes sense to make a condition that employees will inform potential renters that tractor trailers are prohibited on the property.
Well, that's up to the board. As I said to you in my email back, Mike, I thought the testimony was pretty clear that, that there was no way that a tractor trailer could actually get onto the property.
Well, the concern is, right, that they pull in and can't get out. So I think, the reason why it would be explicitly a condition would be so that their employees are required to inform people that tractor trailers are prohibited, to mitigate the chances of a tractor trailer pulling onto that property.
Somewhat, but I could easily envision the scenario where just a guy who doesn't speak to the people in the facility decides
Agreed.
they're going to come in, with a
Agreed,
tractor
which is
trailer.
why, I figure we should mitigate it as much as possible by making it a condition so that, I don't know. I don't know if we're if I'm overstepping here and stepping on their business practices, but,
I agree that we ought to do whatever we can to make sure the tractor trailers don't go in there, whether it's just reciting that that's what they committed to or making it a condition. At the end of the day, though, someday at some point, somebody's going to drive a tractor trailer into the lot, and
no doubt.
at which point somebody's going to say, "Get the hell out," and they're going to back up, and it's going to suck. But I don't know what more we can do about it than recite in the resolution that that's what they committed to do, and it's our understanding that tractor trailers will not be permitted, and nor will there be space for them.
I don't think that there is any question that we're not concerned about the aberration, but we're concerned about it becoming a regular practice. And certainly, I do have specific recollection about their witnesses stating, both of those things, that they weren't going to be permitted and that they would be informing potential customers that it was required that they schedule. The strongest way that we can put that in the resolution, if we can make it a condition, let's make it a condition. If we can do nothing more than make it a recital that this is what they represented, so that it's clear that this formed a basis for our decision, then we should do that. What's the strongest way that we can do it?
Okay, I'll confirm that before I send the resolution back to Janice and see how I can fit it in, either as a condition, which I think what I'm hearing is the preferable way for that to be included, versus a recital in the resolution, and I'll take care of that.
Thanks, Art.
Excellent.
Okay, hearing it, do we have a motion to approve the resolution as amended and discussed?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay. Okay.
And I believe we had a somewhat of a motion from Ms. Lachlan to consider our bills before we proceed with the next application.
Okay. I know I received some comments from Keith. I distributed revised bills that were submitted by Boswell Engineering with descriptions as requested. I think they did revise most of the bills, but there were several that Keith identified where the descriptions are still missing. So my suggestion is to approve the bills that have the full descriptions and not approve the bill where the descriptions of work are missing.
Would make that motion.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? Okay.
Okay.
All right. And that brings us to our application this evening of 29 Cedar Avenue.
Okay, so Alan, I've made you a panelist, as well as Paul and Anthony Sapp as well. Let me know if there's any other people to make panelists for this presentation.
That should be it. Okay. Can you hear me, Janice?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. May I proceed, Mr. Chair?
Chair, before we start, there was if I could address Arthur for a minute. I was part of an email chain regarding the liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission. I was on an email chain regarding some questions between a member of the public, HPC Chair Bennett, and I just had some questions, Arthur, if you don't mind. One first, because I was part of that chain, the member of the public suggested that perhaps I should recuse myself. Do I need to recuse myself? I don't see a conflict being the liaison between the two boards. And having some discussion of the Historic Preservation Commission concerns about this application prior to this meeting.
And as you and I discussed offline during our email exchange, I don't see any implication to the historic preservation ordinance that arises from this application. And as I understand it, Mike, you are the liaison between the HPC and the planning board. In view of the fact that I don't see, and the applicant can address this as well, but in view of the fact that I don't see this application in any way implicating the historic preservation ordinance, I don't see that there's a basis for conflict for you not hearing it.
But even if there were, I would assume that being the liaison between the two boards, it would make sense that I would relay those conversations to the planning board, correct? It wouldn't be a conflict regardless. I think that's something that should be addressed publicly. The discussion that the HPC had, or that a member of the HPC had with a member of the public came to us with questions, included a member of the HPC. Shouldn't that be something that I address with the planning board as the liaison?
That's entirely up to you. In my view, that material, to the extent it was discussed, is outside this board's hearing. It's essentially hearsay at this point.
Well, the only issue, though, Arthur, is that one of the documents presented at the time did identify the structure in question as a barn, which I think is material to the discussion tonight. So I think it's something that we should probably address with the rest of the planning board.
I'm not sure I know what document you're referring to, and if it's not going to be part of the applicant's presentation tonight, then you would need to produce that as a board exhibit so that we all know what we're talking about.
Sure, it's the document that was produced, and I don't mean to go down this other path, but I think it's important, for full transparency, that the board knows that I did see an additional document as part of this text chain. It was this state. It was on our Historic Preservation Commission website. It was the New Jersey Office of Cultural and Environmental Services survey that is listed on our website, and it does show that it does state in there that this structure is a barn. Whether that's determinative of whether this is not a carriage house or a barn, I think we can have that discussion, but I wanted to make sure that others were aware that I did see outside material in addition to what was sent in our packet.
So do you want to put that document into evidence here, Mike?
Sure, Janice, can we do that? Just, it's from the website.
Can I jump in here, Mr. Chair, briefly?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Like you reported this time, you're aware of the conversations I'm referencing.
Sure, right, I am, Mr. Graham, and I appreciate you mentioning it. But I'll start with just the last issue that was brought up about the barn. We've referred to this structure as a barn in some of our materials. In fact, you see on the screen, barn/carriage house.
Yes.
And again, as we'll demonstrate later, we believe this structure meets the definition of a carriage house. So whatever
and I'm open to that possibility. I want to make sure that it's noted that there was another document that does reference it as a barn, and it's the New Jersey Cultural Survey, and I wanted to make sure that was out there. Yeah.
And we've referenced it as a barn ourselves, so we have no issue with that. And I also wanted to note, by the way, I should just state my appearance for the record, Alan Tremulak, representing the applicants. Mr. Neese had called me earlier and mentioned the issue that Mr. Graham raised about whether he had any conflict or obligation to recuse himself. I don't believe there is any, and on behalf of the applicants, we have no objection with Mr. Graham, participating in this hearing.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Tremblay.
And that's fine. With regard to the document, Mr. Tremblay, have you seen the document, and do you want to be heard on it?
I don't know that I've seen the document that he's referring to. I don't know that I've seen it.
Located on the website?
Pardon me?
I was
It's on the
asking
Historic
Janice.
Preservation Commission website, or it's the map that shows the historic sites, and if you click on 29 Cedar Avenue, it'll pull up the historic document referencing the history of 29 Cedar. Janice, you're on mute if you were trying to talk.
I pulled it up, so it's available if you want to see it, the 2 pages.
Okay.
Okay. If you want to see it, I can pull it over now.
Please.
Sure. I don't think it's
All right, there we go.
a reason to be disqualified either from the conversation, but I want to make sure that it's out there. And there was a discussion about the historic implications, the HPC implications of, the structure potentially being, I believe it is a historic site.
So here it is.
Yeah.
See if I can blow this up. That's the house. I think I need to see the next page.
On the top of the next page, yeah, the very top line.
A large
there,
barn, it says, the house at the center of a gently sloping 175-foot by 525-foot site with a large barn halfway down west of the property line. Or down the western property line. I think it's the only reference to the barn.
I believe so. Yes, that's the only one that I read.
Okay.
But Janice, I would also, I would also like to address whether this was not reviewed. I just want to make sure we're clear on the record. So this was not reviewed by the HPC because we're really talking about a south-facing dormer being added, which is not visible to the street, and because it's more an interior renovation. Correct?
Right. I sent out the language from the ordinance.
Because it is a historic resource, from what I'm gathering from all this.
It's identified as a potential historic site in the master plan. And
Okay.
if the development application involves improvements that are visible to the public, then it gets referred to the HPC. But this is a conditional use permit.
So that gets me to one additional question. So the reasons why we're saying it's not visible to the street is because of the vegetation in front of it and also because of the setback. Is that correct?
Well, that's part of it. But all of the improvements, and if you listen to the testimony, the improvements that were made to the barn were made were made pursuant to a building permit that was submitted prior to this application even being submitted. So really the scope in 2018. So the scope of this application is really the conditional use permit. And that factors on whether or not this is a carriage house.
And there was a question regarding the 2018 permit. I'm assuming since work has already been done in reliance to that grant that we don't really have. HPC does not have review authority, but I just want to make sure that moving forward, would the HPC have review authority of a structure like this?
No.
Is it
No,
because of the setback and the vegetation?
No. Because this is not a local historic site. Okay. It's not locally designated. For the improvements that they made to the barn, there was no development. It did not require a development application. all they needed was a building permit. There's no HPC involvement in building permits for properties that are not locally designated.
Okay,
Okay.
I wanted that on the record. I appreciate that, Janice, and I think we may at the HPC meeting want to have a further discussion of this, but I think that answers all the questions that were posed in that email chain so that everybody's aware of what the discussion was. And I think also the most relevant documentation was the one that you just showed the board. So I just want to make sure that that is all on the record.
I would just like to add to that that the member of the public who began this process, if you will, was also insisting that perhaps what ought to happen is that there should be a supplemental application by the applicant. And again, I think this is well beyond any consideration that this board can offer that person who began this process. So I just want to be clear that the board has no jurisdiction to require this applicant to resubmit or to submit a supplemental application of any kind. I just want to be clear about that.
Okay, and yeah, again, Janice, I think the HPC will have a further discussion of the review authority at a subsequent meeting. But I appreciate your insight, and Arthur, your insight. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chair, ready for me?
Yes, Mr. Tremulak?
Okay. So again, Alan Tremulak appearing on behalf of the applicants who are Anthony Sapp and Denise Powell. The application involves the property at 29 Cedar Avenue. It's an application, as we've already discussed, for conditional use approval to allow my clients to reestablish use of the barn or carriage house on the property as a second dwelling unit. And as I've indicated, we will present evidence to demonstrate that this structure, whether you call it a barn, a carriage house, whatever, does meet the definition of a carriage house under the Montclair ordinance. The property is a very large lot consisting of over 2 acres of land in the R1 zoning district. Property's located directly across from Nishawayne School on Cedar Avenue, and it's a very deep lot, as you can see and as you will see. Property contains a large Victorian house, which was built in or around 1860, as well as an accessory building in the rear, which was built around the same time, certainly before 1900, probably closer to the time that the main house was constructed in 1860. Now, as we've also already discussed, I'm going to call it the carriage house, has been undergoing renovations for a number of years, pursuant to building permits issued by the Montclair construction official. That work is in process and ongoing. The only additional exterior change that's being proposed as part of this application is the addition of a dormer in the rear of the building facing to the south or away from Cedar Avenue. And, I realize this board doesn't hear many conditional use applications, but it's when you're dealing with a conditional use, the board's function is to determine whether or not we meet the requirements or the conditions for a carriage house to be returned to use as a dwelling unit. And those conditions there are 6 of them, and they're enumerated in section 347-9 of the zoning ordinance. And I think it'll be clear from the presentation this evening that there's no question that we meet those 6 conditions. And the only other thing we need to show you, as I've already indicated, is that we need to show you that that this structure is in fact a carriage house. And if it's a carriage house, and if it meets the 6 conditions, then my clients are entitled to utilize that carriage house as a second dwelling unit on the property. And that's the only relief that is being sought tonight. There's no site plan review or any variances. And the fact of the matter is, if the board were to determine that we do not meet any of these 6 conditions, then we would then have to go to the zoning board and request a variance. This board has no authority to grant a variance from a conditional use requirement. Only the zoning board can do that. But again, I don't think there's going to be any question that we meet those 6 conditions. And I don't think there'll be any question that this structure does qualify as a carriage house as it's defined in the ordinance. So I have 2 witnesses to present this evening. My client, Anthony Sapp, the property owner, will provide some testimony regarding the history of this building and some evidence that he has put together to establish that it was in fact the second floor of this building was in fact occupied in the past. And also Paul Sionas, the project architect, will testify. And I'd like to begin by calling Paul Sionas as my first witness. Janice, I don't know, do you need to mark exhibits, or should we just proceed with Paul's testimony?
I pre-marked them, so I can go through them. A1 is the application. A2 is the certification of taxes paid. A3 is the proof of publication. A4 is the affidavit of service. A5 is the 4-page plan set prepared by Sionas Architecture dated October 7th, 2021. A6 is the planning report dated December 10th, 2021. And A7 is the PowerPoint presentation prepared by Paul Sionas dated January 17th, 2022.
Thank you. Paul, are you there?
I am here.
I think you need to be sworn in.
Yeah, I'm not seeing him.
I'm here.
Oh,
Can you see me,
There
Arthur?
you are. I
There
can
he
see
is.
you now, Paul. Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
My full name is Paul Sionas. I am the principal architect of Sionas Architecture, PC, located at 8 Hillside Avenue, Montclair, New Jersey.
the chair offering Mr. Sionis as an expert architect. Will you accept his qualifications?
The board is very familiar with Mr. Sionis's qualifications, and we will accept him as such.
Thank you. Paul, you're familiar with this property, are you not?
Yes, I am.
And in addition to preparing the plans, you've also prepared plans for other improvements to the property, as well as plans related to a prior land use application. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you prepared the plans submitted in support of this application?
Yes.
And I assume you're prepared to discuss those plans with the board. And as is your standard practice, you've prepared the PowerPoint that's on the screen now that's been marked as Exhibit A7, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Why don't you begin with your presentation?
Can I ask a question first? Just, is this drawing drawn to scale here? Because
Yes,
it looks like the accessory structure is about the same size as the residence.
it has a different footprint than the residence. That's correct.
But it's about
It's
the
a
same.
one-story. It's a one-story structure.
I'm just trying to get the lay of the land here. I know I hear Mr. Trembulack's advice on what we're supposed to be looking at, but I'd just like to understand the whole project. Okay, so there's an accessory structure there that looks, not that small, not much smaller than the residence, but it's 1 story. What is that used for?
I'll explain that in the testimony.
Okay, because I didn't see any pictures of that in your submission, did
No.
I?
No, you
Oh,
did not.
thank you. Okay, thanks.
So the PowerPoint consists of 18 slides. Primarily, they're colored versions of the drawings that were filed to the planning board with the application. And they were added to with photographs provided both by the applicant and the Montclair History Center. And we'll hear the applicant describe several of the slides when he discusses the existing interior of the building. So slide number 1, the right side is the site plan colored for visibility. The property is 29 Cedar Avenue, which is lot 31 in block 2903. And it's one of the larger single family properties in this area. It's 2.12 acres. It's 175.5 feet wide and 525 feet deep. And as you can see from the bottom left photo that was supplied by the applicant that he took in 2012, the property has a large lawn area and mature trees. It's located on the south side of Cedar Avenue, and it's improved with 3 structures. So there's the 3-story Second Empire Victorian style single family house that was constructed around 1860, and there's a photograph in the top left that's provided by the Montclair History Center. That photograph is undated. There's an existing 1-story accessory structure which serves as a home office, studio, and gym. That was constructed with a building permit in 2010 by the applicant. The building permit was acquired in 2010, and the building was completed in 2017 when the Township Building Department provided the applicant with a certificate of occupancy for that accessory structure. And then there's the existing 2-story barn, 1-time carriage house that was most likely constructed when the main house was built around 1860, and that's the subject of this application. There's also a driveway colored in gray leading from Cedar Avenue to the rear of the house and then to the rear to this barn/carriage house. And as I said, the photo on the top left is a historic photo of the main house, which was received from the Montclair History Center. Mr. and Mrs. Sapp, the applicants, purchased the property in 1995, I believe, at which time they converted the main house from either a rooming house or a 2-family house back to a single-family house and began restoring the house at that time. And as we might hear, Mr. Sapp is a excellent and somewhat meticulous carpenter contractor by trade, so he has been doing this work himself. Slide number 2, please, Janice. So this is slide number 2. This is a Google Earth satellite photo, and you can see 29 Cedar Avenue. The subject property is directly across the street from Nishuane School, and it's one of 6 lots on this south side of Cedar Avenue between Pleasant Avenue to the east and High Street to the west. There are 4 single-family house lots along the western lot line, and then there's 2 single-family home lots along the southern lot line. So this is a fairly large property. Next slide, please, slide 3. Slide 3, the bottom left is the Montclair zoning map, and you can see that it's located within the R1 single-family zone district, and it has a minimum lot width by zoning of 80 feet, and the existing lot width, as I stated, is 175.5. The top or the right side is the Montclair tax map, and at 2.12 acres, it's clear that this is one of the larger lots in the area. Next slide, please, slide 4. Slide 4 consists of 5 photographs. These are photos of the barn 1-time carriage house. So photo number 1 in the top left was taken by the applicant and provided to me by the applicant. It was taken in 1995 after they purchased the property. And this is a view of the barn carriage house, which, as you can see, has been neglected. It's a little, you can see.
Mr. Sionis, I'm not
Please.
sure. Where are you now?
Slide number 4.
I'm still showing the Google Map overview on the screen that Janice is sharing. Is slide that you're talking about is the next slide, right?
I'm referring to slide number 4. Janice, do you?
Yeah, I have slide number 4 on my screen. Does everybody else see slide number 4?
What are you seeing, Janice?
Slide number 4 with the 5 photos?
I don't see 5 photos. I see the surrounding area, 29 Cedar Avenue, which was the preceding.
I see those 5 photos.
I do as well.
Yeah, I see the 5 photos also.
Then maybe it's only my computer that's having the problem. It's telling me I'm looking at your screen, and so I don't know what's going on.
I don't know if it helps, Chairman, but probably a minute ago, I got a notification of low bandwidth and everybody's video cut out. So
Yeah,
it may not just be your computer.
I got that too, Keith. Yep.
Okay.
Me too. And I'd like to ask the question, when Paul was giving the explanation of the accessory building there, that was completely muted. Was that just my computer? Or was that everybody?
I had the same thing, Carmel. Mhm.
Oh.
Yep.
So I don't know what he said about that building.
Are you talking about the building, the rear of the?
The rear accessory building, Carmel?
Yes, I am. I know it's.
I'm happy to repeat what I said about that. I said that it's an existing 1-story accessory structure that contains a home gym, a workshop studio. It was constructed with a building permit that was obtained by the applicant in 2010. And the applicant completed the construction in 2017 when the certificate of occupancy was received from the building department. So that's what I had stated.
Okay. Thank you. So is this for his commercial business or is this a private workshop?
It's a personal workshop, and he'll testify about that
Okay, thank you.
if necessary. John, can you see slide number 4 yet?
Yes, I can see, and I had lost audio, but now I'm back. Okay,
All right. Should I continue?
please.
There's a lot of like background sound. Maybe everybody should be muted.
Yes, absolutely. Please. Yes.
Okay, I'll try. So slide number 4. Slide number 4 consists of 5 photographs of the barn, one-time carriage house. Photos 1 through 4 were taken and provided by the applicant. And the top left photograph was taken in 1995 by the applicant after they purchased the property. And this is a view of the barn, one-time carriage house. It's the north side of the barn. And you could see from this photograph, if you follow that roof line, and even those overhead doors, the lines are pretty crooked. The building was not in good shape. As I testified and stated, the applicant told me when he purchased the property, the main house was in use as either a rooming house or a 2-family house, and he restored it back to a single-family dwelling. So photograph number 2 is taken 3 years later. This is the northwest elevation, and it's a closer view of the front right corner of the barn carriage house. The photograph number 3 at the top right is the rear elevation or the south elevation. The applicant took this photograph in 2001. He took this from the rear lawn area. Bottom left photograph number 4 is that's a view of the southeast corner taken in 2014. And then photograph number 5 is the same front or north view of this barn carriage house that one of my staff members took in August 2021 after the applicant was in process working to restore the building with his building permit to refurbish this building. So he received a building permit to work on this building in October of 2018. Okay, next slide, please, slide 5. Everybody see slide 5? Okay, slide 5. These 3 photos were taken by the applicant in January of 2022 after he'd been working on this building for almost 2 years. So the permit application that the applicant received was to reconstruct deteriorated foundation and first floor walls, straighten out all of the walls and the framing, add a bathroom on the first floor, and square off the rear corner of the first floor where you can see those black steel and glass doors in photograph number 6. So with that permit application, he added approximately 53 square feet to the ground floor of the building, and that was allowed as part of this permit application. It was shown on the drawings that he submitted to the building department. Okay, so the goal was to restore and refurbish the existing building. Okay, next slide, please, slide 6. Slides 6 through 12 will primarily be described to the applicant, and they were provided by the applicant. But one thing I need to point out is that upon purchasing the property, and then at the time that Mr. Sapp began restoring this building and reconstructing deteriorated conditions, it was evident to him that someone, probably an employee of the original property owner, had lived on the second floor while probably caring for the owner's horses and carriages. So I'll turn this over to Mr. Sapp. Do you need to swear him in, Arthur?
Paul, why don't you, and rather than break it up, why don't you skip over I think Mr. Sapp's going to testify regarding the photo shown on sheets 6, 7, 8, and 9. But I think it would be better if you completed discussion of the balance of the PowerPoint, starting with page 10.
Okay. Page 10 is a 1881 map of Montclair that was provided to me by the applicant. It shows the subject property highlighted in red. So the building, the main building, was built and lived in by a gentleman named J. Castor, and I hope to say this correct, Brotigam. And according to the document that was referred to right at the beginning of this meeting, the historic sites inventory survey that was prepared by Eleanor Price for Preservation Montclair in 1981. Ms. Price stated that Mr. Brotigam was an important figure in the publishing business, and he was a member of the first Township Council. He actually opened up and named Cedar Avenue, plus, in quotes, he opened up High Street. I'm not sure what opened up means, except my guess is created the road. And this is according to the 1981 individual structure survey that was prepared for the New Jersey Historic Sites Inventory by Preservation Montclair. And at the time, Eleanor Price was one of the surveyors for these documents. Okay, slide number 11, please, the next slide. Slide number 11 is an enlargement of this 1881 map, and it indicated multiple structures. Presumably there was no indoor plumbing at the time, either for the main house or the barn, one-time carriage house. Indoor plumbing didn't really arrive until the late 1800s in and around Montclair. My house on Heller Way, which was built in 1850, there was no plumbing until 1930. But apparently at the time of this map, there was no indoor plumbing that we know of. And some of the smaller structures could have been outhouses, as was typical of the time. Slide number 12, please. Slide number 12 is a 1906 map that shows only the main house and the carriage house. It doesn't show any of the smaller structures anymore. And even if indoor plumbing was introduced into the main house, we can only assume that the employee, if there was an employee on the upper floor of the carriage house, they either still used an outhouse, which is not shown on this 1906 map, or it was probably unlikely that the property owner was gracious enough to allow them into the main house to use the facilities. Again, I said these are assumptions. I don't know the facts. Okay, slide number 13, please. This is the ground floor, first floor of the building. So the ground floor has 2 indoor parking stalls plus a laundry room, has tenant storage, and the original stair leading up to the 2nd floor. The bathroom shown in that top right was installed as part of Mr. Sapp's 2018 building permit to restore this building. Next slide, please. So this is the 2nd floor, or the loft floor. The plan shows 2 separate rooms, one on the left, one on the right, that could be used as bedrooms. Then a new bathroom with a stall shower would be installed as part of this application at the front center next to the existing stair. And then a kitchen or flexible spaces proposed in the center with a 10-foot wide dormer to provide natural light and ventilation above that existing floor area. Next slide, please. These are the 4 exterior elevations. The applicant has and is restoring the original wood novelty siding, which was typical from 1860. He's installed new windows and 2 new swinging garage doors on the front right, which is the proposed north elevation. Plus, he will install a small gable roof structure at the rear, and that's the dormer used to provide natural light and ventilation on that rear elevation. The glass doors on the bottom right were installed as part of the 2018 building permit application. Next slide, please, slide 16. This is from the zoning chart on the drawings we filed. And basically, this refers to Montclair 347-9, which refers to the use of a carriage house. And the use of a carriage house shall be permitted as a conditional use subject to the 6 conditions labeled letters A through 5. My opinion is that this application complies with those 6 conditions. It's on the same property as the original principal dwelling. Property has a minimum area of 20,000 square feet. As the residential use of the carriage house shall not be permitted on the 1st floor. The minimum habitable floor area for conversion shall be 500 square feet. The gross floor area of the carriage house shall not be expanded except dormers may be added to provide light, ventilation, and access. At least 4 on-site parking spaces, 2 of which shall be enclosed, shall be available for use of the occupants of the carriage house and principal dwelling. So with this application, there are 2 spaces inside of this building. There are 2 spaces adjoining the building, and then there are 2 spaces adjoining the principal building, the principal dwelling. Next slide, please. Slide 17. This is the final slide, but basically, the building complies with the conditions of the ordinance, complies with height and setbacks of structures and setback. This is an existing building, so nothing's changing. And then the last thing was that it looked at the definition of a carriage house in Montclair zoning 347-2, and it states that a carriage house is defined as an accessory building originally constructed at or about the same time as the principal single-family dwelling and used for storage and for 2nd floor occupancy by 1 or more employees of the property owner, and consisting minimally of a bathroom and 1 or more bedrooms. We'll hear Mr. Sapp testify about what he discovered on the interior of the 2nd floor. This building did not have a bathroom. I believe that in 1860 to probably 1900, people used outhouses. So this did not have a bathroom, so we technically don't meet the definition because it didn't have a bathroom, but we feel that and you'll see the photographs by Mr. Sapp, someone, with the opinion that someone did live there, perhaps a servant or employee, but there was not a bathroom in this building. That's all I have. Thank you. Happy to answer questions, but I think some of the questions will be answered by Mr. Sapp going through slides 6 through 10. Right. 6 through 9. And then maybe it's best to hold the questions till after you see these slides.
Mr. Sionas, I think you're reading my mind. Before we start asking questions, I would like to hear what Mr. Sapp has to say, and then we can direct questions to the both of you at the end of that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, then I'll call Anthony Sapp as my next witness. I see him on the screen, I think.
I don't see him quite yet, but that doesn't mean anything.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I don't see him. I see oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Sapp. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Would you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
My name is Anthony Sapp. I live at 29 Cedar Avenue in Montclair.
Thank you.
Okay. Tony, are you one of the owners of the property at 29 Cedar Avenue?
I'm sorry?
Are you one of the owners of the property?
Yes, I am.
Okay. When did you purchase the property?
We moved here in 1995.
Okay. And you've lived at the property ever since?
We lived here for 27 continuous years, yes.
Okay. How was the property being used before you purchased it in 1995?
At the time that we purchased it, it was a two-family house. It was used, there was partial use as a rooming house, but it was listed as a two-family house. And when we first purchased the house, we stated that we wanted to convert it to a single-family house, and we were required by the township to immediately remove the kitchen that was on a second floor, which we did. And I got subsequently a whole bunch of building permits to do work on the interior of the house to renovate it and create a single family home.
Okay. And what is your occupation?
I've been a carpenter since for 45 years, but I'm also a contractor. I operate my business in New York City. I don't do any work out here. And so all the work that I've done out here on my house, I've done largely by myself and with subcontractors, most of them local.
Okay. What's the nature of your business in New York City? You're contracting?
I'm a general contractor. I do mostly renovations of 19th century townhomes, not unlike my own home in all over Manhattan, but for the last 20 years, mostly in the West Village of Manhattan.
Okay. Now, Paul showed some slides of work in progress on the barn/carriage house. Have you been doing that work yourself?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and did you apply for and obtain building permits for all the work that's been completed or is in progress?
I have an existing building permit obtained in 2018, and I have been working on that for the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay. By the way, though it's not relevant to this application in any way, in my opinion, I think I would just like to mentioned that you had applied previously to the zoning board to demolish the barn structure and replace it with a new building. Is that correct?
Yeah, back in 2009, I believe it was.
Okay, and that application was approved by the zoning board with certain conditions, is that correct?
The actual variance that I was requesting was not approved, but the zoning board offered me, I guess what you might call a compromise, to build something like the structure I was requesting, but they attached certain conditions to it that were ultimately unacceptable to me. And the day following the zoning board hearing in 2009, I requested that my lawyer, your colleague, Cal Trevinen, not memorialize the approval and in fact inform them that I did not want to proceed with it.
And you haven't proceeded, obviously, with that
Never, no.
approval because that would have involved demolishing this structure, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So you've now decided that you would like to use the renovated carriage house as a dwelling unit, correct?
Correct.
Or
I
seek
was
approval
unaware.
to do that.
Yeah, I was unaware that there was an ordinance that allowed legalization of a carriage house until about a year ago in a conversation with Mr. Sionas. And when I became aware of it, we developed the idea a little bit. He informed me that, and you did as well, that one of the requirements in the ordinance was that there had to be some evidence of prior occupancy of the structure. And that led me to do I had always been aware that there was this room on the second floor that clearly had been occupied. As I walk you through the slides, I'll point to the evidence on the interior that someone clearly lived there. And discovering that and satisfying myself that someone lived there, we proceeded to put together this application, which leads us to where we are now.
Okay, that would bring us then to the 4 pages in Mr. Sionis's PowerPoint, beginning with slide number 6, which is on the screen.
Okay.
Can you walk us through or walk the board through the various photos that are shown on this page and the subsequent pages and, explain what they are and what they show in your opinion?
Sure. So there are 6 photographs on this first page. They hopefully sort of follow a pathway from the outside to the inside and then up to the second floor. The first 2 show an interior and an exterior view of a door which exists, or it did exist, on the west-facing facade of the barn, which would have been opposite the structure shown on the 1880 map that could very well have been an outhouse. I suspect it was. And in garage door parlance, this would be referred to a man door as a quote man door, as opposed to a garage door. The left photo is the door patched up because at some point it was probably taken out of use for security reasons. And the second photo on the top row is the interior of the same location patched up. The third photo is a photo on the ground floor of 2 existing tubes, steel sheet metal tubes, which lead down to 2 hoppers. they conveyed grain from the second floor storage area to the ground floor where the horse was housed, along with the carriage. Just to the right of that grain hopper is the stairs that lead to the second floor. That's a photo in the bottom left corner of this slide, is the stairs leading up to the second floor. And then the two photos on the right are, it's actually a picture of my wife, which I used for scale, arriving at the top of the stairs to the second floor. The large square container that you see to the right is directly above those two sheet metal tubes in the upper right corner, and that's where they stored the feed grain for the horse in bulk. And then the right-hand photo shows a picture of my wife walking down towards the room that I hope to persuade you is the room where someone clearly lived. You can see the door opening. And then if we could go to the next slide.
Before you do that, the room your wife is walking in, heading towards the back room, what was your understanding as the use of that room that she's,
The room that she's walking in?
no, the room that she's walking from?
That would be, and there's a photograph of that, I think in the next slide.
Okay.
It's the large main area. You see the upper left floor, the railing on the bottom left of that photograph is the stair railing as you arrive at the top of the second floor of the barn. That would be, and in the middle of the left of that photo is the opening of the hayloft. That I presume is where bales of hay would also be hoisted up to the second floor and stored in the main larger storage area of that area of the carriage house. And then the rest of the photographs in this slide are all of the interior of the smaller room at the end of that second floor, which exists at the west end of the carriage house. And the photo on the upper right corner, if you look carefully at all these photographs, especially the exterior walls, the rafters, and also the wall, you'll see the remnants, in some cases full, but in other cases just the remains of very heavy paper or cardboard lining that someone clearly applied very carefully to increase insulation, heat loss, reduce heat loss, and presumably reduce drafts from the outside in. There are also in the lower left corner is the flat board partition. The two photographs in the left and center are the partition which separates this bedroom from the rest of the main storage area. You can see a door which is constructed of a board and batten, what's called a board and batten door. And you can see the hole where a cylinder lock had been installed at one point, and on the extreme right in the lower row of photographs is what's called a rim lock, common to the 19th century. I have them in the rest of the main house, are mostly rim locks like this. And there's also an eye hook at the top of that photograph, which would have been used so that the person who was in this room could close the door and presumably have privacy and be even able to lock the door. Before we leave this slide, you can see, and I think there's some better pictures of this in the next slide, but on the interior partition, which separates this room from the larger storage area beyond, there are numerous personal photographs and also magazine covers used as decoration and as a kind of sort of wallpaper to improve the appearance of this room. And then could we go to the next slide, please? These are, again, two photographs at the top of the interior of the room, looking at the partition that separates it from the rest of the second floor. And on the left photo, I'm pointing to a strip of wood which had some coat hooks on it for clothing storage. And on the right, just more pictures of the personal remnants of the personal photographs that the occupant had used to basically wallpaper the interior partition. On the lower left picture, there is one bay that still has it's complete. If you can see, it's very carefully applied heavy paper, which was clearly installed. This was, interior insulation in wooden frame buildings didn't really appear until after the 1930s, 1940s. The main house that my wife and I live in, when I did demolition, had no interior insulation at all, and so all of this interior paper was, I'm sure, installed to reduce heat loss, reduce drafts from the outside, and just as a sort of wallpaper. There is in this picture, but there's a better close-up in the right-hand picture on the bottom of a close-up a picture of where a stovepipe used to exit the building, and that gray strip horizontally above the stovepipe hole is what's commonly used as a heat shield to keep the direct heat from the top of the stovepipe from coming in direct contact with the framing members above it. And then if we could go to the next slide. This is a close-up of that hole. That hole still exists. It's in the west wall of the building. And as you can see, there's a remnant of a sheet metal stamped stovepipe hole. I downloaded one from a wood stove catalog just so that it would be clearer to anyone who's not familiar with wood stove installations what that remnant is. Are you able to see my mouse moving on the screen?
No.
Well, then I'll stop using the upper left-hand corner is a close-up of the stovepipe exit hole. The right hand is a typical stovepipe collar, a modern one. The bottom picture is again another picture of the heat shield above the hole, and the middle picture is a close-up of the hole with the little remnant of stovepipe collar removed, so that I could show you the evidence of charring over long use by someone living there to keep warm. The final picture on this slide is the exterior picture of the west facade, showing a sheet metal patch, which is visible on the middle picture from the inside. but you can see the square patch that someone used to seal off the hole when the wood stove was removed.
Okay.
And then if you could go to the next slide, please.
Before you do that, Tony, the photos on the 4 pages that you just discussed, the conditions depicted in those photos indicate, in your opinion, that a portion of the second floor was utilized for occupancy?
Yes, there's no question in my mind that someone lived there.
Okay,
And had his wood stove to keep warm.
okay. And there's no indication of any bathroom facilities in this building, is there?
No, and, you know, again, there's a, you know, as Paul mentioned earlier, the structure that he's familiar with, that is a carriage house that was built sometime in the 19th century, but didn't have plumbing installed until 1930. I'm not a historian, but the bit of time that I've had to do some research into the history of Montclair indicates that there was some spotty water delivery in the early 20th century, but not much in the 19th century, and that fresh potable water didn't really appear until the development of the Wanakwe Reservoir and the Grove Street pumping station, which were in 1928 and 1930. So, you know, as Paul and said before, I don't believe there was indoor plumbing anywhere in Montclair in 1860. This was, you know, literally before the inauguration of President Lincoln. And I'm pretty sure that at that time, everyone was using outhouses, including the residents of the main home. There's a well, there's evidence of a capped well in the area right behind the main house in our parking area. And there is an old brick cistern sort of diagonally to the east of our house, which was used for some kind of freshwater delivery to the home by the occupants. And I presume that well water was shared with the occupant of the carriage house.
So is it your understanding from some of these maps that are contained in the PowerPoint that, you know, that there was back in the 1800s, a carriage house on the property, which was utilized, I'm sorry, an outhouse on the property utilized by the carriage house as well as the main house?
That would be my assumption, that the only other reason to have any other small structures on the property would be for use as outhouses.
Okay. Now, you've learned quite a bit about the history of this property and, you know, the 27 years that you've lived there, and also in preparing, you know, for this presentation tonight, correct?
I think so. I've you know, it's taken me a little bit of time to get my arms around the distinction between a carriage house, the definition of a carriage house, as defined as a structure that actually houses a horse and a carriage, and in my view, a groomsman or an employee who took care of the horse and hitched the carriage for the occupant of the main house. And the modern day definition in the ordinance of what a carriage house is, which includes indoor plumbing, but probably indoor plumbing which didn't exist until horses and carriage were out of use in America and in Montclair. it looks to me like cars appeared in Montclair and the streets were converted from dirt to gravel in the early 20th century. In fact, there's a photograph that I found in the Montclair library digital collection, or perhaps it's the Montclair Historical Digital Collection, that shows the fire station, host company number 2, at the intersection of Cedar Avenue and Harrison Street, which wasn't built until 1901. And there's a photograph, I can send it to you if you want to see it, showing that after that building was constructed, they show the entire company in front of a horse-drawn carriage, which conveyed barrels of water to the fire. And that carriage, drawn by horses, is passing over a bridge that goes over a drainage ditch, which presumably was the precursor to any sewer system in Montclair. So I'm relatively confident that for at least the 40 years between 1860 and 1900, and probably well beyond that, there was no indoor plumbing, either in the main house or certainly not in the carriage house.
Okay. And just talk, if you can, not in great detail, but just a little bit about the history of the property and the original owner of this property and what he did and how the property was used as you understand it from, the research you've done, and also whether, based upon what you've gathered, whether you're able to determine who actually lived in the second floor of the barn or the carriage house.
I don't have a name or a photograph of that person or persons. I do think that Mr. Browdigan, J. Castor Browdigan, who was apparently a prominent figure in the New York publishing world, who probably commuted regularly to New York City. And there was train service to Montclair in the late 19th century. That he was of, I'm not saying he didn't ride a horse occasionally or care for his horse, but I doubt he was the person who hitched his horse on a daily basis to his carriage, or groomed his horse, or mucked his stables, or loaded hay into the hay loft, or grain up into the grain container, or maintained the 2 or 3 acres that the property was at that time. And so I think it's completely plausible to assume that in 1860 and the at least 40 years forward, that there was an employee who, in exchange for some compensation and in addition for lodging, lived on the second floor of the carriage house.
Okay. One final question. In Ms. Talley's memorandum, she raised a question about how the property would be utilized, the carriage house, if you were received the approval of the board to resume the use of that as a dwelling unit. And there was particularly a concern about the possibility of short-term rentals such as Airbnb. Can you just talk about that and how you would utilize the property, or how it would be leased if this application were to be approved?
Yeah, if I can tell you, if you know me, that you know that I would be the last person who would ever be interested in having an Airbnb on my property. The use for this second floor residence, if approved, would be a conventional rental agreement. Probably in the short term, would be occupied by one of my adult children and their children. My son and his wife currently live in our main house with their 2 children, and we'd be delighted to have them live in the 2nd floor of this carriage house. But if those circumstances change, it would be a conventional rental.
Not any kind of short-term rentals.
No plans for that.
Okay. I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman, for Mr. Sapp.
All right, do we have questions of Mr. Sapp or Mr. Sionas from the board?
Yes, I have one question.
I knew you did.
Yeah, why not? Keep it going. Mr. Sapp, you made a lot of assumptions about this property. Are you in any way trained in historic research and anthropology?
No.
So these are all your personal assumptions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'm not hearing anyone. I will then open up the questioning to members of the public in attendance. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Sapp or Mr. Sionas concerning what they've testified to this evening?
Okay, members of the public, I've unmuted you. So you have to turn on.
Good evening.
Okay.
Good evening. It's Frank Werbacki, 398 Upper Mountain Avenue. The first question is for, I bounce back and forth because of the testimony and it's being commingled, but Mr. Sionas, on the map 1881, did you review the entire map or just a section of it?
As I testified, this was provided to me by the applicant, and I reviewed the area that was highlighted in red to show the subject property. I did not look at the rest of the map.
That is the entire map.
So you wouldn't be aware of properties outside of that map area that are owned by Mr. Brogdon?
Sorry,
Mr.
back
Werbacki, you are breaking up. Can you repeat your question?
I'm sorry. So the question is, are you aware, are you or the homeowner, property owner, aware of properties that were owned by Mr. Brogdon at the time of map 1881?
My understanding, and I couldn't swear to this, but is that Mr. Browdigan also purchased property on, I believe, Upper Mountain Road and built a house there as well. But this is the photograph in slide number 10 is a photograph of a map from the Montclair Historical Society, and I believe it's a segment, that's complete unto itself. It's not obviously a complete map of Montclair, but it's
a complete map of Montclair. I'm just on the map of 1881. And the author of that map of 1881, I'm just asking simply, is that the complete map, or did you take a section from the Montclair Historical Society archives?
That's a map that I have in my own home. It's a framed map which my wife gave me as a gift. I don't know if it has text in the lower right corner. So I believe it is a segment of a larger map of all of Montclair, but I think in that era, they published multiple pages of an entire city in order to get the detail. But that's all I really know about this map, is that it also exists in the digital collection of the Montclair Historical Society, I believe.
Yes, you're correct. Mr. Sionas, the map seems to show a property of J.C. Bruggen on Cedar, fronting on Cedar Avenue. Did you take a moment to scale the map as far as where that outhouse was in relationship to any other landmark? Because my understanding is that outhouse that you suggest is there is in the middle of High Street.
I'm sorry, Mr. Abaki, you cut off halfway through. I have to ask you to repeat that.
Yeah, certainly. The map of 1881 that you referred to that shows the property of J.C. Bruggen. The question was, did you scale the map in making your determination of where the outhouse was? Because the outhouse seems to be in the middle of what is now High Street, which is 200 plus feet from the house.
I couldn't say.
So, Mr. Sionas, I wasn't asking you, Mr. Sapp, sorry.
Okay.
Right, I couldn't say either, but it does appear that I believe the next map, the 1906 map showed, which I have, the 1906 map shows High Street, which was installed between 1881 and 1906.
It was installed in 1883.
Excuse me?
It was dedicated in 1883.
The High Street, thank you. I think your question was, did I scale the 1881 map? And my answer is no.
Okay. So I can't ask you any further questions about where these properties are located in relationship to High Street, because quite frankly, did you do any research on the property itself beyond just assumptions only? Because my understanding is that Mr. Bruggen was trying to auction off 3 properties, including 2 on Cedar Street and 1 on the corner of Mountain Avenue and Union Street since 1883. So my question is, how do you know that Mr. Bruggen actually lived at 29 Cedar Avenue?
I don't know. I can tell you that when I took all of the marble off all of the fireplaces in order to restore the fireplaces and reline the flues, that the backs of all of the marble pieces had Mr. Bruggen's name etched into them. So I'm sure that he was actively involved in building the house, and the little piece that was read at the outset of this meeting indicates that he built the house, and I assume that he lived there.
Did you research the Montclair Library photo database that shows Mr. Bruggen's house, which is of a similar style but distinctly different and more elevated as far as the architectural quality than the house at 29 Cedar Street?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that question.
Did you do any research? Did you look at the Montclair Public Library photo database of Mr. Bruggen's home, which is of a 29 Cedar Street.
Again, I missed the middle part of that. I did just, maybe this will answer your question. I'll tell you what I did do. I made two separate inquiries at the Montclair Historical Society on, was it Orange Road? And a young lady named Erin Bennett helped me extract all the files that they did have on 29 Cedar Avenue. And there wasn't much except for a similar description of the initial development and opening of 29 Cedar Avenue. And then a second inquiry that I made to them to inquire when a municipal sewer system and municipal water distribution system was developed in Montclair. And she did supply me with some information on those issues. But again, I'm sorry, I missed the meat of your question, got lost in the springtime. If somebody on the board heard it, maybe you could repeat it to me.
I believe Mr. Rabaki asked if you were familiar with another house that the former owner of your property may have constructed that was of similar size and architecture, but of higher, felt it was higher quality. Does that roughly summarize what you were saying, Mr. Rabaki?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm not aware, other than that the historical record does. There's a history of Montclair that was written at the turn of the century, which mentions a subsequent development of a house that he did. I think it was on Upper Mountain Avenue somewhere, and other homes that he built in Montclair in other years. But I don't have any information on that.
The home, for your information, was on the corner of South Mountain Avenue, what is now South Mountain Avenue and Union Street.
Okay.
Also, did you do any research, like Public Library, the Montclair Times? Because the research I did showed that Mr. Brodigan was trying to sell his properties on Cedar Avenue, and he resorted to an auction in 1883, and he listed the properties as having 10 rooms and 13 rooms, and each having a bath. Can you tell me what the difference is between a bath and bathroom?
I don't know if there were baths at that time. They were probably supplied by well water and maybe some internal pump system. But I'm not aware of that, and I was not able to find that information when I was trying to get more information on the.
Okay. Could you clarify? The research indicated that there was a rug repair service at 29 Cedar Street in that period. Is it possible that what you found in the second story of the barn could satisfy the needs of a rug repair business versus an occupancy by an employee?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry. The connection that's coming through to me is very, very staticky.
That's okay.
It's staticky to all of us. I can't hear half of his questions,
It's a very bad connection.
what he's getting at here, but
I believe, if I understood his question, he wants to know if there was I believe there was a statement about there could have been a rug repair business operating at that address, and could not the occupancy of the second floor of the structure in question have been used for a rug repair business as opposed to someone's, room where they lived. Is that correct, Mr. Rabaki?
Yes, it is.
I'm not aware of a rug repair business being there, but I am, as I explained in the photographs that I showed you, there is a fair amount of evidence that someone occupied that room, was able to lock it from the inside, decorated it with numerous personal photographs and items, hung clothing inside there, and kept themselves warm. Beyond that,
Okay.
I
And
wasn't a rug repair
I think
business.
this next question really probably goes to Mr. Sionas, but either one of you. I think I heard that there was an extension of the building of 53 square feet, and that it did not conflict with condition or requirement number 5 in the ordinance determining the church house. Did you confirm that the building was expanded 53 square feet? The church house was expanded 53 square feet?
Tony, I'll confirm that because that's what I testified to, that when you received a building permit in 2018 to refurbish and renovate the barn/carriage house, it included squaring off the rear of the first floor, which added 53 square feet to the ground floor. And this was in keeping with the building permit application. And it was prior to the thought of applying to a board to restore the carriage house.
I'm confused. When you say squaring off the building, I'm speaking of the expansion on the southern facade of the building as shown between the photographs of the prior conditions and the improvements subsequently made, I assume after 2018.
That's correct.
So you do not satisfy the condition of requirement number 5?
No, this was done in 2008 with a 2018 permit application. And this was no intent to establish or reestablish a carriage house at that time. This is a separate application.
Okay, so for the ordinance, I'm confused again because the ordinance says you cannot expand the carriage house, and you're testifying that the applicant did expand the carriage house.
We're not proposing to expand the house in this application, done previously.
Historically, it's in the total, I'm sorry. So the building, the historical use is 150 years old. The building is 150 years old, at least the internal parts of the building. And you're saying that the expansion that happened 4 years ago is not pertinent to the application?
Good for you. That's good.
Okay. Good. That's the extent of my questions.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rabaki. Are there any other questions from the public of either of these two witnesses concerning their testimony this evening?
Yes, could I make comments?
Please
Hello?
identify yourself.
Yes, of course. My name is Donald Whitaker. My wife, Marie Bensman Whitaker, and I reside at 83 High Street,
Right. And
which my wife is.
and these are questions that you can ask of the witnesses.
You asked
if
me
you
to
want-
identify myself.
Right, but you said
I'm
you
in the
wanted to
process
make
of
a
doing that.
comment. You wanted to make a comment. I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
Well, sometimes comments and questions are similar.
Well, comments come at another phase of the hearing. This is just for questions. So if
I can
you're truly,
phrase them as
if you
questions.
truly want to make a comment,
No,
you
I can
should
phrase them as
reserve that till later in the proceeding.
Oh, I see. Then perhaps I could hold off on some of the comments. But all right. But I'll finish my introduction. She's resided at 83 High Street since 1978. The applicant requests, quote, to convert an existing barn structure to a carriage house to be used as a single-family residence in accordance with the conditional use requirements set forth, et cetera, section 3479. Is that no longer the applicant's request to convert an existing barn structure, but to use what they consider an existing carriage house for conventional use or whatever it's called, conditional use?
Your
Mr.
question is,
Sionis, Mr. Sionis,
I'm sorry.
or
Yeah,
the
I
applicant
see-
can
I
either one
see
of them
the
can,
idea. Yeah, it's
either
true.
one of them can answer the question.
Sure. I really don't care. Yeah. Mhm.
And Mr. Tremilak, if you want to answer that question also, if you want to be heard on it, you can also answer the question.
well, I mean, we're seeking to reestablish use of this structure, whatever we want to call it. We believe it meets the definition of a carriage house. We want to utilize the carriage house as a dwelling unit.
Right. So conversion to an existing barn structure is really no longer the part of the application.
Well,
I mean, it does make a difference if it's a barn or a carriage house, I think, doesn't it?
look, we can, it's been characterized in historical records as a barn. We believe
Exactly. Yeah.
shown that it meets the definition of a carriage house and that it was also used for occupancy on the second floor.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. That's your
what we
contention,
tried
yeah.
to establish.
Right. I understand. Yeah. Mhm. All right. I suppose these other questions are for Mr. Sionis and involve the plans submitted. The bedrooms shown are certainly, I think, by anyone's definition, minimal in their possibilities of usage. The ceiling, for instance, is noted to be 5 feet at the periphery, and for maybe a 2-foot section before it reaches about 6'6". And as we all know, in most building codes, I'm sure Montclair's codes, similar to the National Building Code, allows you to average ceiling heights on a room so that even a 5-foot ceiling, if it gets higher, and I assume they're furring up the sloped joist and the roof construction to make it a sloped ceiling. But it still makes the rooms extremely minimally usable with a 5-foot ceiling at the head of the beds. And the minimal habitable floor area, which is required to be 500 square feet, I think, can probably only be provided, it appears, by including these low or limited use areas. Is that correct, Mr. Sionas?
We're not including anything under 5 feet. And
Oh, of course not. Of course not. No, but I'm saying a space that has a ceiling height of 5 feet is hardly usable in a bedroom. So you're using that questionable lower space as part of your 500 square foot requirement.
As allowed, yes.
I see. As allowed by what code?
The building code.
I'm talking area, not ceiling height now.
I'm sorry.
I'm talking area and not ceiling height.
Correct.
So the code allows you to count the 500 square feet, even though the ceiling height is not usable at that space.
Well, the code allows for 5 feet and above.
I see.
Counted.
The other thing, it's also for Mr. Sionas, I think, there's no, and I'm sure that's not your doing, the building has already been reconfigured, but there's no cross ventilation in either of the bedrooms. Very small windows, very small rooms, in fact. the bathroom noted on the loft floor plan opens fairly directly into the kitchen and dining area, which is certainly not desirable and possibly a code violation itself, I would think, with no intervening space between the dining and kitchen area and the bath. Is that been looked at or considered?
Can you tell me if it's a code violation?
No, I have no idea.
Okay, well, it is not. It is not a code violation for a bathroom to open to a open space.
I see.
So
There
that-
even
and then as far as the windows go,
Mm.
there are code requirements for egress windows for each bedroom. And
Yes.
and that will be conformed with.
No, I understand.
Have
No,
to be.
Those windows were put in. There's just, yeah, I'm just speaking about the usability of these two rooms as a viable rental bedroom spaces. You know, they're
And
They're
and the
rather
center,
minimum.
I'm sorry, and the center of these rooms, the ceiling is almost 11 feet.
yeah, you fur all the way up. Yeah, understand. I guess the last question on the plans would be that the two required enclosed parking spaces there noted to be 9 by 20. I think the average sedan now is about 6 feet, a little less than 6 feet, 5'9". And if you count this recommended 2 feet on either side, they're pretty tight, both spaces. And both seem, especially the one on the eastern side, that it renders access to the bathroom, the laundry room, the storage room, and perhaps most importantly, the stair access to be compromised, since we don't know what size vehicles will be parked there. Pickup trucks are even bigger, I think. Is that in one's determination of the usability of those parking spaces or their intent?
Yes, the township requirement is a minimum of 9 foot by 19 foot for a standard stall. And as we've, many of us have discussed, the typical width of an automobile is 66 inches or 5'6".
That's correct. Yeah.
So that allows for plenty of space in a 9 foot by 20 foot parking stall.
Well, I wouldn't say plenty of space. You're trying to get into a stair that's the only way up to the second floor, and you've got a car parked there, but conceivably it's blocking it to some extent. And
Conceivably, if you look at the front of that parking space,
Mm.
it is not near that stairway.
Mm.
So it's, as you said, conceivably, an automobile would pull up to
Sure.
the front of that parking
Sure.
space, that's outside, and not block the stairway, especially if they're living upstairs.
Right. This is an architectural question, but it didn't involve your work, so I guess it's for Mr. Sapp. The storefront installed in the south elevation, the glass area with double doors, seems a little peculiar in the back of the parking space also, and that leads to the other structure in the back, the building that you built over the last 10 years. What's the purpose of those doors, and why are they sort of where they are in the building?
Primarily to bring additional light.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to obtain those doors because they were a salvage item, and
Did you use them because you had them? Yeah.
Excuse me? Yes, I used
You
them because
use
I had
them,
them,
yeah.
and that they bring a considerable. I made a pretty big effort to not add a lot of extra windows that would change the appearance of the carriage house from the way a carriage house tends to look, with irregular head heights of windows, and only windows that are required to bring the light into areas. If you look at the existing photos from before I renovated,
Yes,
and the photos, with the exception of this large window wall, the windows are approximately the same.
basically the same. Yeah, I agree. Did you? Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. You said the comments. There's a section for public comment later.
There will be at the end of the presentation of all of the evidence. There will be an opportunity to be heard.
Okay, I thought the evidence had been presented, but I'm willing to wait for that. Thank you.
Can I get the name of that last questioner, please?
Donald Whitaker, Whitaker.
Thank you.
Can we get your address, sir?
83 High Street.
Do we have other questions from the public of either of these witnesses?
I don't think so. I think we're done.
Okay, Mr. Tremulak, do you have further witnesses?
I just
Chair, real
wanted
quick,
to,
real quick, Chair, if I apologize for interjecting, do we have to deal with the parking? Are we okay? Is there there's no variance needed for the parking, correct?
There is not.
Yeah,
There's
we're
not,
not
okay.
dealing with parking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask Mr. Sapp a question or two in light of Mr. Rubaki's question. Mr. Sapp, as part of your research and looking at the history of this carriage house, did you come upon anything to indicate that the size of the carriage house was significantly larger than exists today?
Yes, in fact, while we were listening to Mr. Rubaki, I emailed a photograph to Miss Talley. I don't know if you received it in your email, Miss Talley, but it shows a 1934 map from an insurance company showing the rear yard. Yeah, there it is. No, it's not my computer. It shows a significant bump out on the back of the barn, which was subsequently removed. And there was evidence of that in the original structure. I think you might even be able to see it. Did you receive that email, Miss Talley?
She's got it on the screen, I think.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah. So if you look, if it's possible to see this, it's fairly small on my screen, but.
Janice, I sent this to you also late in the day,
Okay.
with a note that we might utilize this.
Okay, hold on.
Mine might be a little larger and easier to see.
I should have it. Yeah, I think this is what you sent me.
Yeah, that's, yeah. So can we mark this as Exhibit A8?
Yes, and can you describe it for the record, please? I can't make out what it is.
That was my next question. Tony, can you tell the board what this is and what it shows?
Yeah, it's a plan view of the property, and it's an excerpt from a map, which is in the Montclair Historical Society digital collection. It's plates 35 and 36 of the Sanborn Fire Insurance Map, Montclair, filed in 1934. And again, it's just shows a plan view of the property with a slightly, with a plan view of the carriage house showing a fairly large bump out or addition on the rear of the structure. And so I came across that and to show that the barn at one point was had an addition added onto it and was then reduced in size.
Right, so the bump out that's shown on that 1934 Sanborn map does not currently exist on the carriage house, right?
Although before I replaced the siding and did the refurbishment of the current barn, you could see the outline of where that bump out existed on the old barn. And I'm sure I have.
Do you have any idea as to the dimensions of that bump out?
It was close to the full height of the barn and the carriage house barn, and the pretty much the full width of the rear of the barn.
Okay.
I'm sorry, wait a minute. Other than this picture on this map, do you have other evidence that there was a bump out and of its dimensions?
Only the outline of the old, you know, where
Where it attached to the, where it attached to the existing structure, is that what you're trying to say?
yeah, where it was attached to the original structure and was patched in.
And what exactly do you see when you look at it? I mean, what is this outline? Can you describe it to us?
Simply that there was a wider section of the carriage house that extended to the south of the structure. You know, again, I'm speculating.
Well, I'm asking, well, Mr. Sapp, I'm asking, what do you see on the wall that gives you this evidence of this outline?
Oh, I see. You know, normally the horizontal siding would go from the corner of the building to the inside corner of the building. What I see on the exterior of the structure is evidence of a large square where there used to be a structure sticking out, and that's been removed and patched with similar siding. But there's
Well,
a separate
so
structure.
in other words, the siding that's on the back of the structure shows a different set of siding that's inset to the original siding. Is that what you're saying?
It's flush with it, but you can see where it was stopped and started, where the old.
And is it a uniform square?
Yeah, yeah. You know, if you give me a few seconds, I may be able to find a picture of it.
We can give you a few seconds.
Sure.
I don't have.
Perhaps it's evident in slide 4, photo 3 of the PowerPoint presentation.
I'm actually. I think I'm finding. It's a little. It's a little grainy, but I'm going to take a screenshot of. I don't know if this is the best shot that I have of it, but give me a second here and make sure I don't.
And Janice, when I zoom in on photo 3, and I don't know if this is what the applicant's referring to, but it almost looks as if about 5 feet from the right-hand edge, there's a set of siding there, and then there's different siding much longer after that. I had to zoom in pretty far.
You can see that on the fourth picture too, because the boards are sticking out
right
slightly on the when they show that corner on the fourth picture.
I'm just sending this picture now to Ms. Talley. Let me know if you received it.
Yeah, you're right, Chair. When the fourth photo might be a better one.
And it's basically a close-up of the photograph that you have up there on the screen, but maybe it's a little clearer.
While Janice is getting and circulating that, can I just ask a question of the chair? Is the object of the game here that we're being asked to find as a fact that this was a carriage house because that's a necessary prerequisite to our acting?
The object of what we're doing in this hearing is making a determination as to whether or not this structure is a carriage house. And Art, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that's all we're supposed to be deciding. If it is a carriage house, then certain things apply. If it's not a carriage house, then if they want to go further, they have to go to the zoning board.
I think that's correct. If the board determines it's a carriage house and that it meets the conditions of 347-9, carriage houses are conditional uses that are permitted in this zone.
I just sent an even better picture. It's more clear showing the rear for what it's worth.
Is that what's showing on screen now, Janice?
No, let's see.
I just sent a better one.
And Art, is a finding by us that it is or is not a carriage house potentially reviewable? I mean, in other words, what I'm trying to figure out is if we say it's not, it goes to the zoning board. If we say it is, then it doesn't. But
And the permit issues, it's a permitted use, and it's conditional use and permitted.
Well, that's what Jeff has asked is, can they appeal our determination?
If it's
either the applicant or objectors.
if the board denies the application,
No, if we determine that it is not a carriage house, which would then basically be a denial, that would be the only reason why we would deny it, right?
correct.
So if we determine that it's not a carriage house and we deny the application, is that appealable?
That would be up to the applicant. I would say that anything before the board is.
Could the applicant appeal it, or could an objector appeal it?
I think the applicant could appeal it because typically interpretations of the zoning ordinance is the function of the Board of Adjustment.
Correct.
Okay, so if you say no, they still have the ability to go to the Board of Adjustment.
For an interpretation of the ordinance.
For an interpretation, if the Board of Adjustment agrees with the planning board, then they would proceed for a use variant, a conditional use variance. So it's, I think that would be possible. That would be the next step.
Then why would they have come to us in the first place? Why wouldn't they have gone directly to the zoning board?
That was their decision.
Oh,
I was trying to get there. We'll talk about it when it's back. I was trying to get there by a little circuitous route, Carmel, but I think I didn't mean to interrupt the flow, but I just had that little point of order, and we can talk about that when we're open for our own deliberations.
okay.
Okay, so this is the section of the house, and you feel that where these boards come together, this is evidence that there was another structure that would have been attached to the rear of this that would correspond to what you're seeing on the map that you just provided. Is that correct? Mr. Sapp?
Tony,
Yes,
is that correct?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
So looking at the photo that's on the screen, and I guess for the record, we should mark that as A8.
No, that's A9.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. It's what I'm writing, not what I'm saying. We can get that photo back up. All right, so Tony, looking at this photo, does that show portions of the carriage house that are no longer there today?
It's to me, it shows that there was either an opening or a structure that was attached that is no longer there and has been patched on the rear of the carriage house.
Is that to the left of the photo we're looking at? Is that what?
No, I'm talking about the section, the square to the right of the left-hand section, where you can see boards that are interrupted and stop and start. There's from the extreme right-hand picture side of the building, if you travel to the left, you'll see a sort of choppy vertical line, which shows that there was something there, either an opening or an addition that extended southward. That's why I submitted the Sanborn map, just to show that it seems to have recorded an addition at that time.
So, Mr. Sapp, just to cut to the chase here, this is what you point to, and you feel that this is evidence, but this really could be something else, couldn't it? You have no idea exactly why these boards look like this, correct?
No, it's either,
And-
either an opening or an addition. That's what I was.
or a repair or something.
Could be.
And, you know, not to put too fine a point on this factor, but you really don't know at the end of the day whether anybody lived in this building at any point in time, do you?
I don't have a name, but I have.
You don't really have any personal knowledge of whether or not somebody lived in this building.
No personal knowledge. It was 160 years ago.
Right. But you have no personal knowledge that somebody didn't live in this building, right?
No.
And basically, all of your testimony this evening is based on the circumstances that you're seeing with respect to what's located in the building and drawing conclusions, you know, from those circumstances that you're seeing.
Yes.
Right. You have anything further, Mr. Tremulant?
No, I don't, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Do you have any further? Yeah. So no further
No
witnesses.
No further witnesses. No.
Okay. Does the board have any final questions from either of these two witnesses? Okay. At this point, you know, that appears to be the totality of the applicant's case. I would open up the floor then to the public for any comments with respect to the application that members of the public might wish to make.
Carol Wynn, this is Frank Wabaki.
Yes.
I would ask that since the applicant, his attorney, introduced a new exhibit after questioning had closed, that we reopen the questioning.
All right, Mr. Rabaki, if you have questions with respect to the photographs and what was stated, then you can pursue that. If they're not questions related to these new pieces of evidence that have been put in, these new pieces that have been put into evidence, rather, then no, there is no extension for that.
Understood. I'm just specifically going towards the Sanborn maps, a Sanborn map of 1930, whatever it was. And I wondered if the architect or the property owner had looked at the 1907 Sanborn map, which reflects a smaller structure.
No, I am not familiar with it.
Okay. Thank you. That was the extent of my question. May I go straight into comments?
Please do.
I don't know where to start. I'll start by saying that I think that there's been no actual evidence or supporting documentation that shows that this was a carriage house. On the contrary, I think this was one of many properties by Mr. Brodigan, and I think his primary property was at the corner of Union and Mountain Avenue, or South Mountain Avenue as it is today. Therefore, I highly doubt that he had employees on properties that he rented out. What is probably, I don't object with the objective of the applicant. I guess I'm very disturbed by this process and how the planning board is coming to hear this application. I understand its use of application is very narrowly defined, but I do need to educate members of the board and the attorneys and the listeners, specifically the HPC, that this property, 29 Cedar Avenue, has been identified in the inventory of historic properties in Montclair by the township since 1993. It's incorporated in planning board's master plan. Matter of fact, it was the number 6 listed individual property that report, which the planning board adheres to. So the fact that we are dealing with a structure 29 years later that has been stripped of all external historic fabric and only considering whether it's historic use, but not considering its historic, whether it's historic, is crazy to me. So I guess my point is that the planning board has, certain members, not all, have made a point of loopholes in what the intent of township is and our documents and our standards. And I think those people have a clear example in front of them of one of the biggest loopholes we will see, certainly in 2022, and not in the last 10 years, about how the historic fabric of a building that is 150, 160 years old can be ignored for 20 years. And we are no better off in 2022 than we were in 1992. That's the sad state of affairs. And if you guys get to decide what you want to decide,
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't understand most of, the last couple of minutes of Mr. Baki's testimony. I don't know about the board, whether you could make it out, but I had a hard time understanding him.
Yeah, I could understand him pretty much, although he was breaking up. And Mr. Tremulak, he was questioning the process and that the fact that the building could be altered to the extent that it has been, despite the fact that it has been around for 150 years, is a loophole in the regulations. And I believe he's urging that something should be done about that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that, if I
Mr. Rabaki, you're really breaking up now. So you're I don't know whether you're too close to your microphone or too far away, but speak a little slower, and so that and
it's better.
Keep talking.
It's better. The only point I would add to your summary of my remarks was that everybody clearly understood that this property was identified in the historic inventory of the planning board's master plan historic preservation element of 1993. So that's 29 years ago. And you are now faced with dealing with a property that is no longer historic. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Backy. Any other members of the public wish to be heard?
Yes, Donald Whitaker again. I would like to make a few comments if I could.
Please proceed.
Can you hear me? I'm not breaking up, I hope.
You're crystal clear.
Good, thank you. My wife and I both have the same concern, and it's a general one. We're probably the closest to this proposed change. We certainly are closest, our property and our house, to the accessory building that was given its permit in 2010 and built over the last 10 years. And frankly, our experience with that building, and this will not be news to either Mr. Sapp or Ms. Taylor, because we have communicated multiple times to the planning department about it. Our experience has been a negative one with the accessory building, a building that was given its approval to be constructed as a quote studio and hobby space, close quotes, has been a building that's been a thorn in our side for the 10 years. There have been countless times of noxic, foul smoke coming from the stack, burning wood, I assume. Very, very, very loud noises. I've never taken decibel readings, but from what's clearly heavy woodworking machinery, probably wood planing. So it's always been, our skepticism has always been strong, and we've repeated it to the plan department in writing, that there was at least some commercial use of this accessory building, which we didn't think was appropriate in an R1 zone. And our fear with the current proposal application is that it will just extend that use. It's right next to the building. It may well be part of that plan to use that building. I don't know. And again, I apologize. It is our skepticism. I have no facts, and the planning department apparently investigated in 2017 and claims that there was no violation of non-accepted use in R1 zone of that building. But again, our experience has led us to believe and made us skeptical of that, and we're still skeptical of it. So we worry that that changing this building, making it into a residential unit, will somehow be used in conjunction with what we see as a partial commercial use of the adjoining accessory building. So that's just a comment. I would like to give one more fact. The notification of this application that I read on the application to adjacent property owners is in error. Both 79 and 87 High Street ownership is incorrectly noted. You would guess, therefore, that it appears that the present owners at 79 High Street were never made aware of this application and were not legally notified of it. But that you'd have to check into. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So with respect to the last point, Janice, the notice was sent out pursuant to the listing from the municipality?
Yeah, the 200-foot list was created by from the tax assessor's office for everybody within 200 feet. And we have to rely on the information that we have at the tax assessor's office for the ownership.
And can I respond to that also, Mr. Chairman?
If you think it's necessary.
Well, I think he was questioning whether the current owners of 79 High Street received notice. According to the list I have, Daniel Kaufman and Jerry Kaufman are the owners of that property. I happen to represent them when they purchased 79 High Street within the last year. So they are in fact the current owners, and we served them with the notice in accordance with the list we received from the town. And I know they received it because I got an email from my client, Dan Kaufman, who told me he had received it. So they were notified.
Okay. All right.
May I just make a final initial comment? Final comment, excuse me.
Sure.
It's simply to reinforce what was said by the other member of the public and implied, I think, by a lot of the discussion tonight, that this building, by all definition, is a barn, always has been a barn. Architecturally, for instance, the low ceiling on the loft additional floor is typical of barn construction. Anybody with historical knowledge of barns knows that. If it's intended to be a habitable space, the roof structure is differently framed. So that plus the historical evidence, at least that I've seen, for instance, in the Historic Preservation Office in 1986, clearly notes it to be a house with a large barn. So I think the inclusion of the photographs of some sort of fairly insignificant memorabilia around the space does not qualify it as a carriage house. And I feel like, I think the other caller did, that the whole application hinges on this, because if you were to permit this to be not a carriage house and yet approve it, then it's a conversion of a barn, which could be done by anyone with meeting the requirements of 347.9, which could be obviously a dangerous precedent in the town to do that. So my feeling is, and I think it's based on historical data as well as just observation of what's there, is that this was a barn. The top was a loft, typically used to get hay from there to the first floor for the horses and for other services. Whether or not anyone actually lived there for a night or two, I have no idea, and I don't think anyone else actually does either. Thank you.
Chair Wynn, excuse me, we just ask Mr. Whitaker how long he's lived in his house?
44 years.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Tremillat, do you wish to be heard? In summation. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
I unmuted, unmute.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask, may I have 3 minutes to make a quick call to my client before we wrap this up?
Sure. Let's take a quick 5 minutes.
Thank you.
And we'll see you back in 5.
Thank you.
on the record.
Mr. Tremblant?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Are we waiting on me, Mr. Chair?
Actually, I was waiting on Janice to tell us that she's got the recording straight.
Oh, we are recording.
All right, very good.
All right.
So, very good, thank you. So, Mr. Tremulak.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward application. The reestablishment of the use of this accessory structure as a single-family residence. And we're dealing with, Code Section 347-9, which provides that the, quote, the establishment or reestablishment of carriage houses as single-family residences shall be permitted in any residential zone as a conditional use, subject to the following 6 requirements. I don't think there's any question that we comply with the 6 conditions enumerated in the ordinance. I think the only question really that the board that's of concern here is this in fact carriage house as that term is defined in the zoning ordinance. And the definition contained in the definition section of the ordinance, defines a carriage house as, first of all, it has to be an accessory building located on the same property. Clearly, we satisfy that. Constructed at or about the same time as the principal single-family dwelling. I think that's fairly clear from the old maps we have going back to the 1980s, which indicate that this structure was there around the time the house was built in 1860, and that the building was used for storage. I think that's clear, and for second floor occupancy by one or more employees of the property owner. Now, this is I think maybe what the board might be struggling with. I mean, again, the occupancy here took place, a long time ago. It's almost impossible to come forward with some, documentary or clear proof as to who lived in this property and when. But Mr. Sapp has, put together photographs that have been described and discussed this evening, which we think clearly indicates that someone was living in that separate room on the second floor of this building, separate and apart from the storage area, a contained room with finished wood walls with some, I guess, an attempt to create some insulation with heat pipe that served a stove, and other indications, including photographs on the walls, and indications of wallpaper and all. I mean, that's the best we can come up with, and I think it indicates that there was someone living in that second floor, and we're looking to reestablish occupancy on that second floor of the carriage house. The other requirement is that the second floor occupancy was to consist minimally of a bathroom and one or more bedrooms. Well, there was certainly a bedroom. Was there a bathroom? No, but no one really had a bathroom back in the 1880s. And it's, I think the most important thing is occupancy here. And at that time, people used outhouses, and there's indication that there was an outhouse on the property, before there was, plumbing available to this in many properties in Montclair. So I think we've provided sufficient proof to establish that this structure satisfies the definition of a carriage house, that it was used for occupancy at one time, and we're looking to reestablish occupancy at this time. And I think it's also, I think, somewhat important to note that this is an extremely large property in this part of town, over 2 acres in size. And we're talking about a dwelling unit that would consist of a little over 500 square feet. And there's certainly adequate room on this property. There's sufficient room for parking and everything else. And that, again, I don't think there's any issue that we meet the 6 conditions spelled out in the ordinance. And I think this is a carriage house. And that my client's application for conditional use approval should be granted or approved by the board. So,
Mr. Chair,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we have another member of the public who was not able to get through previously, but he's back online, and I'd like to, if with your permission, would you like to allow him to make some comments?
All right.
Great. Okay, Mr. Scott, I think we should be able to hear you now.
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you for getting me in, Janet. I appreciate that. And I had called on a number of occasions and could not get in to the meeting, but I would like to make a public comment. My name is William Scott. As you just mentioned, I live at 23 Cedar Avenue. My property connects with Mr. Sapp's property. I've been a neighbor of the Sapps for over 30 years. First and foremost, I support the application based on the fact that Mr. Sapp and his family have improved the character of the neighborhood for that property. Yes, it's a very large property. My property is approximately 1.25 acres, and he has improved the main house substantially over the years. The workshop that he has not impacted me at any point in time. The residential use that he's seeking for the current structure, I don't feel would be a problem. As I mentioned, I've been a neighbor for Mr. Sapp for over 30 years. I've never smelled any thing coming from the residents other than when I burn wood in my fireplace. I'm sure my residents, my neighbors smell the smoke coming from my fireplace, and that is allowed for someone to have a fireplace and utilize it. But I support the application. They've been wonderful neighbors, and I have, matter of fact, over the years, used their property to provide access to my property. I have 7 neighbors that border my property, and over the years, they have provided me access from their property. So they're excellent neighbors, and I totally support this application.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Scott. All right. Members of the board, the evidence is in. Questions have been asked. I, for one, my thoughts on this are that the main problem that we're dealing with here is that we are trying to apply a modern definition and have it applied to a house that's over 150 years old. A few things that have struck me during the testimony, as I've pointed out earlier, is that there's nobody we've heard from this evening who could tell us that nobody definitely lived in this property. Nobody can say that anybody lived in the property because there are no witnesses who have that actual personal knowledge. And what we do have, though, is what we would call what I would call, as an attorney, I would call circumstantial evidence that we're looking at in order to make determinations. And the observations of the applicant, I tend to agree with him that somebody occupied that room. One of the things that strikes me most in that direction is the fact that there were locks on the inside of the room. And there wouldn't be any need for a lock on the inside of the room unless somebody was occupying it. And there wouldn't be any need for heat in that room unless somebody was occupying it. The insulation, it's hard to say because of the age and what's happened, whether or not that was a common place occurrence throughout the building and it's just been cleaned up everywhere else but in this room, or whether, you know, the papers were actually there. But clearly there was an effort made to do something in that room in terms of covering the bare exposed wood. And are all of these conclusive? No, I don't think that they're conclusive. As to whether, you know, our definition of a carriage house, it meets the definition. It could conceivably meet the definition all but for this bathroom issue. And, you know, for an 1860 house, you know, I think we can all agree that, you know, whether we're historians or not, that houses in 1860 pretty much didn't have indoor plumbing. The house that I live in, which incidentally is in the same neighborhood, you know, not on the same street, but in the same area in town. My house was built in around the late 1880s, early 1890s. And I know for a fact that my house did not have indoor plumbing. And I know that because I can see where the extension, where my bathrooms are, where it was added on to the house. And I have different foundations and I have different ceiling heights. And it's clear evidence that that the bathrooms and that the main bathrooms in my house were added on after the fact, after its initial construction, as were some of the other parts of this house that I live in. So I don't find it unusual that houses would rely on an outhouse. The outhouse that was shown on the map, I thought, was closer to the structure in question than it was to the main house. And I'm saying structure in question because, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about, is this a carriage house? Is this a barn? Well, if it's a barn, does that prevent it from being a carriage house? A carriage house, you know, historically or originally was supposed to be the place where you house the carriage and potentially house the animals that draw those carriages. And clearly there's evidence that there were some animals housed in this structure because of the feeding apparatus that the applicant showed us. And I don't think just because somebody labeled it a barn on a map in the late 1800s necessarily excludes it from being considered a carriage house in 2022. For me, I think that the circumstances are sufficient that I wouldn't have a problem classifying this as a carriage house, despite the fact that it doesn't have a bathroom in it, because I don't think it would have been originally constructed with a bathroom in it. So those are my thoughts. What are the rest of the board thoughts?
If I could speak, it's Robin.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair Nguyen. I would have to say, well, first of all, I agree with a lot of what you said, Chair Nguyen. And will we ever really know definitively, to be decisive, if it was a barn or a carriage house? It's 160 years old. But I think that Mr. Sapp did a lot of research. And the fact that besides the locks, that there were photos, there was a stove, there was wallpaper, which would indicate to me that it was a decoration, that somebody actually did live there. And I would bet to say that over 150 years, people did sleep in there and people lived in there, and especially if there's a stove to keep warm. I also want to say on a personal note, my children went to Nishoing School for 7 years, and I drove them to school. And I passed Mr. Sapp's house for 7 years and parked in front of it many times. And I have to say, I've never been inside, but what Mr. Sapp did outside to that house is stunningly beautiful. And it is a beautiful Victorian, I think, a Victorian home. And I think that if Mr. Sapp and his family want to renovate this structure, which I think is a carriage house, I say we would be lucky to have him do this. It's his work is, from what I've seen on the outside, like Mr. Scott said, is impeccable and is beautiful. And it would be a win-win for our town to have Mr. Sapp and his family renovate this structure. Thank you.
So look, I get hung up on process sometimes, and I'm a little hung up on process here. And so because I'm still relatively new, I have sort of a question. And Mr. Chair, I'm going to be guided entirely by your answer to this question. I didn't really think I signed up for, findings of fact on whether something was or wasn't a carriage house 100 years ago. Is this the kind of application that Janice made the point that this could have gone to us in the first instance. It could have gone to the Zoning Board of Adjustment in the first instance.
Mr. Jacobson, Mr. Jacobson, what do judges do?
Well, they decide. Well, but we're
What do judges do?
quasi-judicial body.
What do judges do?
Well,
They decide facts. They decide facts, and they decide how the law applies to those facts.
Well, they decide, but in the first instance, Mr. Chair, they decide matters that are within their jurisdiction, and judges.
This is within our jurisdiction. The fact that they could have gone to the Board of Adjustment does not mean that they couldn't come before us. Otherwise, Janice would not have accepted the application. We wouldn't be sitting here tonight discussing this.
If I could intervene for just a moment, Section 67 of the municipal land use law specifically says that a zoning ordinance may provide for conditional uses to be granted by the planning board according to definite specifications and standards, which shall be clearly set forth with sufficient certainty and definiteness to enable the developer to know their limit and extent, end quote. So that is the basis for jurisdiction in the planning board, if that addresses your question, Jeff.
It does, thank you.
Can I just make one comment in response, Mr. Chairman? I realize it's not my time, but
yes, Mr. Tremolo.
Just very brief. The planning board interprets ordinances all the time when you're deciding applications for the variances and what's permitted, et cetera. And the law, I think, very clear, Mr. Jacobson, that if we were seeking an interpretation of the ordinance, that would go to the zoning board. But the planning board has the authority to interpret the zoning ordinances in considering any application, including this. That's clearly within your authority. You do it all the time. And obviously it requires an interpretation from this board and a determination from the board whether we meet the definition. So thank you for the opportunity to address that point.
All right, so what about the other members from the planning board? Comments?
My one hesitation, Chair.
I'm all set. I don't think.
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
No, I said I'm ready to vote. I don't need anything else.
Yeah, my one hesitation, Chair, is that I think it does require a bit of a leap of faith that the use was for an employee of the owner to sleep in work on that property.
Actually, it didn't have to be. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say it doesn't have to be an employee.
I thought that was in the definition of. I thought that was in the ordinance.
That's what Mr. Trembulak said, because I was hanging my hat on that as well.
It doesn't have to be an employee. It has to be that somebody slept there.
Can we get a clarification on that, please?
No, Mr. Trembulak specifically said it had to be an employee of the.
Well, I didn't say it. That's what's in the ordinance.
Okay, so that's what's in the ordinance, right?
And again, we provided, the best proof we could, stamp.
Oh, that the,
substantial.
right, that the qualifications, okay, in our ordinance,
Yes.
outside of it, that says that, one of the six, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
And
I'm
I
sorry.
agree with Mr. Rubaki's point. I don't object to the use. I think actually this is, I tend to favor this as a use for that structure. My concern is though that are we making an exception now that sets precedent, and are we, determining? We really are speculating. We're taking a real leap of faith that was not a commercial use, that it wasn't just an office space. That was the reason why there was a locked door and a stove, that perhaps somebody used it in an office and there was commercial workers on the outside of that door. It's a lot of speculation. It's a leap of faith. I'm struggling with this one. I tend to want to agree that it is a carriage house, but I don't know that it really does meet the requirements.
Well, think back to the late 1800s, and would you have had your office above your stables in your?
I don't know.
Or would you have had your office? Would you have had your office in your home?
But it could have
I
been.
might have. Yes, very
You know,
might have.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, we will never know because you weren't there,
Right.
I wasn't there,
Right.
and we don't have anybody alive who we can really ask at this
I
point
agree,
for
Sharon. I
this
wish
particular
there
piece
was
of
some.
property.
Right.
I wish there was some additional documentation. 'Cause I agree that there's plenty of evidence that was used as a stable and that there were
So-
horses there. The feed grains there. What was
So we
used
have to look
upstairs,
at what
maybe
we
was just
have.
storage.
We have
Sorry,
to
Sharon,
look
go ahead.
we have to look at what we have. We can't,
Agreed, and I
and
don't
that's
know
all
that
we
I'm
can do.
speculating too much by granting that it is a carriage house.
I don't think we have any proof that it wasn't an employee. We have no way to prove that whether people who lived there were or were not. So I don't think we can answer that question, but we can just as easily assume that they were as they were not.
Right.
I agree, Ms. Wilson. I'm struggling with, should we favor the granting, based on the fact that we don't have definitive evidence? This is a difficult question, I think.
Mike, I might be able to speak to precedent. One of the qualifications is that if you use this clause, the property has to have a minimum area of 20,000 feet and frontage of 150. So that's a pretty good sized property. So I think, the number of lots in Montclair that meet that size criteria are relatively small. Probably
Okay.
don't have,
That's helpful, Tony. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, may I speak? I'm kind of
Yes, you can.
thinking along the same lines as Michael. We're looking at this very narrowly. We don't take into account personalities and the fact that people fixed up the house and it looks really nice. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at, does this fit the definition of carriage house? To me, that is a leap of faith, as Michael said, too. We haven't had any clear and convincing evidence, in my view, that tells me this is absolutely a carriage house. So in light of the fact that I am not convinced, I can only say no, that I don't think it's a carriage house. And it looks like a barn to me as well. And there could be other uses that we're not aware of that they used. Is there any evidence that people slept there? No, it's just a heated room, in my view, with some hooks which you could be hanging farm implements on, not necessarily your clothes. So it's all kind of imagination and speculation. So in my view, I cannot buy into the fact that this is a carriage house.
So if you feel that it's not a carriage house and it's a barn, what should the structure become then?
That's not our question. Our question is
It's a zoning board. It's a zoning board question. I mean, this feels to me like something that belongs in the court of the zoning board and not our court. But I'm still waiting to hear what other people say. But this one just has the feel to me of something that belongs in somebody else's jurisdiction.
I think one of my
I didn't
questions
comment
relates-
before, but I'm pretty convinced that someone slept there. Stove, that's all I needed. So I didn't say that before, but I'll say it now.
I think
There's
one of
no
my
water?
questions.
There's no evidence of water.
This was 1860, not 1960.
It's not, I mean, I don't think that's a flippant remark. I think
It's not, but what I said is not a flippant remark either. You have to take into account when this house
understand
was
that.
built and when it would have been occupied and what would have been likely. And it's most likely in the late 1800s that your servants would have occupied the barn or the carriage house or the outside accommodations that they would not necessarily have been in the main house.
We can agree to disagree.
We
I'm
can.
with you on
We
that,
always
John.
do. We always do.
We
Yeah,
sure
because
do.
I do think we're also making assumptions that there were employees, right? So I know we want to modernize the statute. We want to look at this through modern lens, and I do agree to that to some extent. Bathroom to me is meaningless because there's no way they could have had a bathroom back then. But for me, it really turns on, do we really have sufficient evidence that employees of the owner slept there, and that's what I'm really struggling with. And I tend to agree with Carmel's point that we need to look at this through a narrow lens. I think this is a good use, but I don't know that we're, as Jeff stated, are we the right body to determine this?
That's not the question before us. The question before us is
Right.
simply,
Is it a carriage house or not? Right. I'm agreeing with you, Carmel.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, it's got a hayloft. I mean, a carriage house, in my view, is not something that has a hayloft and a grain supply.
But it was for storage. Carriage houses had to be used for storage, and you wouldn't have the storage on the ground floor because you had the carriages on the ground floor. Again, look at it through the lens of a late 19th century, not a 21st century lens. And if you accept the fact that maybe somebody slept there, it's more likely than not that it was an employee as opposed to a family member. That's. Again, in the late 1800s.
We don't know that anybody slept there. I mean, we're just this.
I know, but I'm saying if you accept the fact that somebody slept there, and I think, again, that the circumstantial evidence is that it was more of a it was set up so that it certainly could have been someplace where somebody slept and stayed.
It was a heated room, basically. Anyway, enough said.
Are you ready? Do you want me to call the vote on
John,
this?
John, we couldn't hear, we can't hear you, John.
John got muted somehow and he was trying to say something.
That was Janice just trying to shut me up.
Tough question.
We're discussing, and does anybody have anybody else want to be heard on this who hasn't been heard?
I've got one question, and it relates to the conditions of the conditional use, and specifically about the gross floor area not being expanded. When, maybe this is a question for the chair, for Mr. Neese, when does that come into effect? I understand that the applicant is not proposing any additional expansion, but based on the photos, I find that they've expanded it already. Would that be a violation of the conditional use, or is that part of the interpretation we're making here tonight?
Well, the ordinance went into effect in 1980. Okay, that's when we established the ordinance allowing carriage houses to be reconstituted as dwelling units. And it says as part of that the gross floor area shall not be expanded. I would assume it means not be expanded for the purpose of its use as a carriage house.
Well, what does having a bathroom on the first floor now mean? That seems like an expansion of use.
To me, it looked like
expansion of use or expansion of footprint.
But that all predated the carriage house. I don't know. Is that this application?
No, the bathroom on the first floor is a recent development, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Question, jog my memory real quick. What floor was that heater on? The first or the second?
Second.
Second.
In the room. That was not. That was that had the hole in the wall. That had the paper on the.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to know if it was on the first or second. Okay.
Yep.
So, Keith, your question. I my interpretation of that would be that as a part of converting it to back to a carriage house use, that you're not expanding the footprint. I don't, but that would be that would be my interpretation of it. Janice and Art, would you say differently?
No.
No.
Okay, that's helpful, and it seems to comport with what Mr. Neese read from the MLUL regarding how conditional uses are, the requirements of a conditional use.
You want me to repeat that? I didn't hear you, Heath.
No, I'm saying that seems to match. When you read that definition, it seems to match with what Chair Nguyen and Ms. Talley were saying about how these 6 conditions apply.
Right. There is a quote from a case that I read today as well that says, quote, "Thus, if the planning board finds compliance with the specified standards of the ordinance for the specific proposed conditional use, it will be required to approve the application." And that's Exxon versus Value Oil, 1977 case.
All right, so it seems like we do have some disagreement as to whether the requirements for the conditional use have been met, and certainly some disagreement over whether or not it meets the definition of a carriage house to be considered. So I will propose.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I didn't have the impression that the requirements are subject to disagreement. The board is really struggling with the definition of carriage house. The requirements have been
We've
met.
had 2 board members say that we don't know whether or not an employee.
No, that's the definition. That's the definition section of the ordinance. The requirements section, the things that make it a conditional use. I don't think there's disagreement of those 6 items.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Okay, sorry for my confusion then. But that does not change what I was about to do, which was to make a motion. I am prepared to make a motion that we approve the application and that we find that this was indeed a carriage house that can be restored.
I'll second that.
Okay, I'll call the roll here. Mr. Brodock,
Yes.
Mr. Graham,
No.
Ms. Lockman,
No.
Mr. Pierre,
Yes.
Counselor Schlager,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
and Mr. Jacobson.
No.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yeses and 3 nos.
You can count me as a yes. You didn't ask me. That's okay.
Oh.
Oh, Tony, no, you seconded it.
No, that was.
I just.
Tony,
Does that count? Oh, I've never seconded anything before. Okay.
I thought you seconded the motion, so that was an automatic yes.
Yes. No, we were going to give you the opportunity to change your mind. All right,
all I can say is that we're not approving a pickleball court in someone's backyard. That's going to get dicey.
All right, well, Mr. Tremulek, and thank you.
Thank you, board.
And yep, we wish the applicant all the best. And
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Interesting application. Thank you.
Thank you
All
for
right,
your
Mr. Sapp.
patience.
Good night.
All right,
Right.
Bye-bye.
motion to adjourn.
Oh, whoa, whoa, can we got to return to my question about whether we're going to be in person next time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I did speak to the manager about that, and the manager said to me that we are still social distancing, and the maximum occupancy of the council chambers is about 8 persons. So we really can't go back to in-person meetings until we got clarification on lifting that social distancing requirement.
Imposed by, I'll talk to the manager myself, but imposed by whom? The state mandates are gone. So this is a Montclair thing?
I can't answer that.
I'll talk to the manager because that ain't right.
That was my conversation with him, and his response to me was, Janice, not yet.
Can I make a suggestion? Moving in this interim period before we go live, I know that we have a communications committee or whatever it's called. I don't think it meets very much, but should there be people be thinking about some way that we can use the technology that we've been using to make better presentations when we do go before the public, so it's easier for the public to see screens and to zone in on things?
Carmel, if you're talking about having a hybrid meeting,
No. I'm talking
ability of doing.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about being able to project on some kind of screen the information that we are presenting to the public so they can see it better.
Yes, please.
Well, isn't that what we did before, Rick? Oh, good.
Great, thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for all your hard work this evening. We're sorry that this couldn't be like a quick, easy application, but hey, it's not 11 o'clock yet, so.
Heavens for small favors. Move adjournment.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
evening.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.